If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining. Today, our guest is Patrick Rogan. Patrick is an HR consulting founder with deep experience in HR management and recruiting. He founded his firm, Ignition HR, to help companies resolve their human resource needs. Before starting Ignition HR in 2016, Patrick worked in HR management for 15 years, which included an 8-year tenure as Chief Talent Officer at DCI Group. Patrick, welcome to our show. And to start our conversation, I'd like to ask you, what was the driving influence that got you into HR in the first place? But then more specifically, what led to you starting your company today?
Well, thanks. Thanks very much, Arnette. It's great to be here. I actually got into HR accidentally, but I'm totally enjoyed my time here. I started in recruiting. The first part of my career, I was focused on headhunting. I did internal recruiting. I did recruiting consulting. I just about everything you can do in recruiting, I did. And an opportunity popped up where, in addition to my recruiting role, I had an opportunity to provide some HR support for one of the business units in a large organization I was in. And I was like, can't be that hard. Let's give this a shot. So I gave it a shot, and I couldn't have been more wrong. It was incredibly hard. Recruiting was very defined. I was a mile deep and an inch wide in recruiting, but I found out in HR you can't do that. You can be an inch deep and a mile wide, but there's so much in HR that it's really hard to get deep in any of it unless you just focus on one specific area. And I just loved it. It was a hoot, and I've loved it ever since. I switched from working in large organizations to small to mid-sized organizations, and enjoyed that much better because I was more at ground level and I could kind of see the fruits of my labor, what I was able to contribute to the organization. And then 7 years ago, I switched to having my own firm, Ignition HR, specifically dedicated to small to mid-sized for-profit and nonprofit organizations, helping them enjoy a lot of the systems, tools, and processes that larger organizations have and use, but just kind of scaled down to their needs. And it's been a blast. I love it.
Oh, great. Great. I know one of the areas of your firm's specialty is HR risk audits. Can you share with us what the key areas that you're investigating to establish or understand what these risks are? And certainly don't want you to give away any secret sauce here behind what you do, but I think our team audience would love to hear about this area.
Sure. Yeah, the audits are usually where my projects begin, are with an audit. And the audit usually has to do, sort of the impetus for the audit, more often than not, is a concern or perhaps something that's gone wrong. And the desire to have someone come in and just take a look at everything, sort of soup the nuts on the people's side to figure out, is this a problem? Is it something I need to do differently? Maybe this is something that's keeping me up at night as a business owner. I will help them to identify, if that is a problem, and if it is, what the solution to the problem is going to be. And then through the course of the audit, I will uncover some other things that, maybe if they had known about, they would have been up at night, but we'll go ahead and nip those in the bud and get those fixed along the way. For my audits, depending upon the size and complexity of the company or organization, they fall into three areas. The first is sort of your kind of traditional transactional HR operations, record keeping, compensation, benefits. Most of your compliance issues fall into that bucket. The second area, in each of the areas have more of a prominence the larger the organization is. So the second area I get involved is on the talent side. So how is your recruiting working? What is your talent management process like? How is your training and development working? And then how are you aligning your staff with the organization and where you're growing and those types of areas. And then the third area is a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit broader in terms of focus, and that's more in terms of HR governance and strategy. You know, I'll get involved with succession planning, change management, other complexities that you want to kind of fine tune your organization on. So as I do my audit, I will ask gazillions of questions. I will look through tons of documentation. I'll build a report and I'll color code it in terms of importance and priority. And then I'll make some specific recommendations on what I recommend. I always say to my clients, what, if anything, I recommend they do differently, but so far it's always been something. So I just say, I'll just, and that's kind of the gist of it. And that's more often than not, that might lead to other types of work in other areas I can help in, or I can refer others if it's some area that I don't specifically do myself.
Fabulous. So, you know, an HR professional in a company, what indicators should be alerting them as to, hey, I might need a structured assessment? Can you share some of those indicators that you see continually arise?
Yeah. So where it should, the things that I typically see that kind of bring me to the table are maybe there is a form that wasn't filed and all of a sudden they're getting some notifications that you haven't done your 5,500 yet and you have a 401k, or maybe maybe there is a particularly dicey employee situation and they're worried that there might be some litigation, or maybe you know, they're growing and they hired their first full-time employee and now they have 4 or 5 employees and they're like, wait a minute, when I hire employees, aren't there some forms I should be filling out, that kind of thing. So those are the typically things that bring me to the table pretty quickly. The other thing that happens, Arnette, is, and we saw this a lot with COVID over the last couple of years, is all of a sudden we have people working from home, and that can create all kinds of compliance issues because now someone's actually physically working in perhaps maybe another state or another part of the country, or a legal nexus has opened itself in terms of there are other compliance things that they need to be aware of. And that's the other thing that all of a sudden I'll get a phone call or an urgent email about, hey, hadn't thought about this before, but I don't even know where my employees are working right now. I'm like, holy cow. Let's get a handle on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So are there any triggers that you often see arise that gets an HR professional or an HR team to go from realizing they need an assessment to actually hiring a firm like yours? Are there triggers that pop up there?
Yeah, it's usually what it comes down to is if the urgency reaches the highest level of the organization, then it's going to happen. If it's kind of like if a manager or a director has an issue, but yet it doesn't bubble up, they don't let people know, it just doesn't happen. So it has to get the attention of the senior person in the organization. And if they get concerned about it, then usually it'll happen. It's kind of like change, you know, like change in organization typically only comes when there's pain preceding it. And with audits, usually there's some type of pain somewhere. There's some type of issue that's popped up, or the threat of some type of pain that all of a sudden gets someone's attention, and then I get the call, or someone else.
Yeah. So as you know, S2 Verify is focused on mitigating HR risk through pre and post-employment background screening. Are you seeing any evolving trends in this industry now with your clients? Are you finding companies doing annual screening? What's the trends that you're seeing?
So I see all of my clients right now do pre-employment screening. That's been pretty standard for some time now. The tricky part now is with this hybrid work environment, I have clients who have employees that they've never ever seen physically face to face, and that's creating some complexities. So I know of a couple of clients who do more ongoing yearly assessments or whatever the regular period of time. My guess is there's going to be more of that, just because I think there's going to be the need, particularly in these distributed work environments, that we're able to verify that we have what we need and that we don't have a particular issue that we need to address at some point. The other thing is, with clients who are doing any type of government work, they usually have statutory requirements that there needs to be a regular interval of a certification of whatever they need for that particular role. They have to verify whether it's a background investigation or drug testing or whatever the requirements are. I'm starting to see more of that I'm in the Washington, D.C. area, so that's a little bit more prevalent here now.
Yeah. So an area that I personally experienced myself as I was building one of my companies was when you determine you need an HR function. I mean, small businesses, typically a small business founder operates on their own and they end up handling all the HR issues.
Yep.
But there is a point in time when, you know, internally your groups are talking about, oh, we need some HR help and support. What can you share about that? When should business founders and leaders start to really strongly considering that approach?
Pretty early, because if you start on the wrong foot, if you start with some processes and procedures in place that are going to get you in trouble down the road, the longer you wait to kind of get that buttoned up from an HR perspective, the more trouble it's going to cause, the harder it's going to be to fix. So I usually recommend, depending upon the size, if you're still operating with independent consultants, you might want to just verify they qualify as independent consultants. And if you're in the state of California, beware. But outside of that, once you get to hiring employees, then I think that's probably a good point. You want to start buttoning things up a little bit. And it could be as simple as just hiring a PEO, a professional employer organization, and route your employees through that company for a period of time. They will help with compliance, or fractional HR, which is what I do in addition to my audit work, is another option. You get a portion of an HR person until you're big enough to start building your own HR staff. And then you still might want some help with that as well too.
Yeah. So the side, if you're a small business and you want to pursue a relationship with a firm like yours, Ignition HR, what is the typical size of an organization that you would be involved with to support them on their HR needs? Is that like 30 people? Is it 70 people?
Yeah, I don't have any less than a dozen. Usually, 15 to 350 is the size that I'm working with. So I'm either the fractional HR totally for a 15-person organization, or a 350-person organization. There's an HR team that I manage, and they do the work that needs to be done on a day-to-day basis there. Yeah.
So, as organizations start addressing this HR evolution, are there suggestions that you have around that growth, around what steps they can take as the companies continue to grow?
Yeah. I think it's important that you build trusted relationships and you have someone that you can contact. And part of it might be an attorney, depending upon the need, and you need help there as well. This is not my area, but I cross the line quite a bit. I don't cross the line. I go up to the line, and I work with employment attorneys all the time with clients. So I think it's important that you're getting the advice you need, so that you're making the right decision in your organizations. And as your population grows, then you're going to need additional resources. At some point, you'll want to start hiring staff, and you'll want someone to assist with that as well. But I would say there are a lot of things you can figure out on your own as a business owner. HR is a big ball of wax. I would recommend you get some support with that. It can be a little tricky.
Yeah. So that kind of leads me right into the issue of structure, HR structure. What can you tell us about HR structures? What have you seen that has succeeded and what has failed in this structure process?
Yeah. So once you get up to between there are different metrics with, the number of HR staff to support a population. Part of it depends upon the work you do and the needs you have of your populations. But I've seen between 50 and 150 employees per HR person, with huge variation in that. And what I've seen not work well is, a company gets up to about 50 or 75 employees, or like, all right, so the economic makes sense. I can bring on an HR person, but I'm going to hire a junior HR person. And that person really isn't going to have any guidance. And all of a sudden, you kind of set somebody up for failure. So they don't have a strong HR background. The numbers fit, they have 75 employees. That person is going to be overworked, and there are probably going to be some compliance needs that are going to fall short. The other side of that I've seen is a similar scenario. You hire a piece of a consultant to provide some overall leadership. Maybe it makes sense to get a junior person and mentor that person, or maybe even better, maybe there's someone in your organization that doesn't fit in their current role, and you think they might be a role fit for HR. Have someone train that person. They already know your culture. They already know your staff. They already know the unwritten rules and policies and that kind of thing. I've seen that work very well too. So I think kind of jumping too quickly into hiring professionals sometimes can be not the best move, particularly if they don't have the right experience for your needs. I also think that looking for opportunities from remote within can work really, really well too. But the key is to make sure you're getting the right advice with someone who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, great. There's been reporting about different trends, and the media has been focusing on concepts such as quiet hiring or quiet quitting.
Yeah.
What do you think these trends are, and where do you think this is going, and what are the risks that we're seeing here?
Well, I think the first thing with the whole quiet quitting thing and quiet hiring, I don't think this is really new. I think it's maybe a little accentuated right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of compression in the workplace, and we owe that to a lot of the baby boomers who decided to retire early over the last couple of years and just didn't want to deal with it anymore. But that's going to wane. That problem will adjust itself. I think the challenge for business owners is to make sure that they continue to push the envelope in terms of making sure that their employees have a sense of belonging. Because if they do, if they feel like they're part of something bigger, if they buy into where the company or organization is going, if they kind of fit the values and live the values and demonstrate the values on a day-to-day basis, then the quiet quitting thing is a non-issue because they're too busy enjoying what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. I think as employers spend more time focusing on what the employee value proposition is they have to make this a place where employers are going to grow and thrive, I think that pretty much takes that other problem off the table. Yeah. I think the problem is you get too focused on the business and don't focus enough on the employees, and all of a sudden you wonder why the employees are leaving or they're not working as hard while they're there. And it's kind of like, well, did that really surprise you? Maybe not.
Yeah. So here we are in the first quarter of 2023. Mm-hmm. What risk would you advise our audience to be looking out for as we get ready to get into the year ahead and move into 24? Are there a couple of risks that you could highlight for our audience?
Yeah, there are a couple stand out that I'm a little bit worried about. One is I do think that because the labor market is a little unsettled right now, I do think there is going to be probably a little bit more churn than we would normally have. So I think the risk of losing good employees is going to be a little bit higher through the coming months. I think also there are probably some regulatory things that are going to be coming that I think we ought to pay close attention to. So, the whole consultant versus employee thing. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Department of Labor making some changes later this year that are really going to call into question positions that used to be pretty clearly independent contractors in the past that would not meet the muster in terms of what the new requirements may or may not be. That's another thing I would pay very close attention to. And then the other thing is, I think as we focus on where we're going in our companies and our organizations, I think there will be the temptation to take our eye off the ball on staff. And if we do, I think that'll be to our detriment. So those are some areas that just kind of stick out for me as I look in the coming months of this
Oh, that's
year.
fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
So before we sign off today, Patrick, I'd like to ask you a question I ask every guest, and that is, if S2 Verify were to conduct a background screening check on you, would there be any surprises?
Well, there might be. If you checked over the last 7 weeks, depending upon how deep you dug, you would see that I own a new boat. So yeah, so that would be kind of interesting.
Fabulous, fabulous. So please tell our audience where they can connect with you and how we can keep up with what's going on in Ignition HR. And
Sure.
I think they would like to hear that.
Yeah. So feel free to go to my website at ignitionhr.com. You can click the box and I'll get in touch with you real quickly. There's also information on other podcasts that I've done and information that I feel is relevant to the work that I do. So feel free to check me out.
Great. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights with our audience. I know they greatly appreciate it. And for our audience, please tune in next week as we continue our series on getting America back to work. I'll have a conversation with my 2 business partners, Bill Whitford and Jim Zimbardi. I want to get into the conversation about why we started S2 Verify and where it is today and where we're going. So please join us next week for that great conversation. And let's get America back to work, because dreams only work if we do.
If you want to stay abreast of HR, recruiting, and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.